I never thought my boring suburban life would turn into a neighborhood drama worthy of reality TV, but here we are. It all started 3 months ago when I moved into Pine Ridge Estates, a quiet community with well-maintained lawns and an active homeowners association. As a new high school teacher in town, I was excited about my modest 3-bedroom home with a 2-car driveway. Little did I know that my driveway would become the center of a ridiculous power struggle with Linda Harrington, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA. I first met Linda at the neighborhood welcome mixer. She approached me with a plastered-on smile, clipboard in hand. "You must be the new teacher at Westfield High. I'm Linda Harrington, HOA president and school board treasurer. You'll want to familiarize yourself with our community guidelines. They are quite extensive." She handed me a 3-inch binder with color-coded tabs. Her voice had that particular condescending sweetness that immediately put me on edge. I thanked her politely, tucked the binder under my arm, and made a mental note to actually read it before inevitably breaking some arbitrary rule. The first few weeks were uneventful. I decorated my classroom, met my students, and settled into a comfortable routine. Linda would wave from her immaculate front yard across the street, her eyes scanning my property for violations. I kept my lawn mowed and my trash bins hidden, successfully avoiding any confrontations. Then came the annual school fundraiser planning committee meeting, where our paths crossed professionally for the first time. "I think we should stick with the traditional silent auction format," Linda announced to the room. "It's been successful for years. Why change what works?" She smoothed her perfectly highlighted bob and adjusted her designer cardigan. I cleared my throat. Actually, I ran a carnival fundraiser at my previous school that raised twice the funds of their usual events. I'd be happy to share the planning materials. The room grew silent. Several teachers exchanged nervous glances. "It's very ambitious for someone so new," Linda said with a thin smile. "But we have established traditions here. Perhaps you should focus on learning our ways before suggesting changes." I maintained my composure, but I could feel the warning bells going off in my head. I had unintentionally challenged the alpha Karen in her natural habitat. From that moment on, I became the target of Linda's special attention, both at school and in the neighborhood. The parking issue began on a Friday night. I had friends visiting from out of town and had parked my Jeep Wrangler in my own driveway alongside my daily driver's sedan. Around 7 p.m., my doorbell rang. There stood Linda in a tennis outfit, despite the fact that I had never once seen her play tennis. "Hello, neighbor," she said, her voice clipped. "I'm hosting the monthly book club tonight. Several ladies will be parking on the street, and it would be so helpful if you could move your large vehicle elsewhere. The street looks so cluttered with oversized cars." I blinked in confusion. "My Jeep is in my driveway, Linda, not on the street." "Yes, but it's very visible from the street. We try to maintain a certain aesthetic in Pine Ridge. Perhaps you could park it in your garage?" "My garage is being used for storage until I fully unpack," I explained. "And again, the Jeep is in my driveway, not bothering anyone." Linda's smile tightened. "Well, I suppose we all make sacrifices for the community, some more than others." She turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing in my doorway, completely baffled. That night, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Vehicle in violation of HOA aesthetic guidelines, please remedy." I deleted it and went to bed. The next morning, a printed notice was taped to my Jeep's windshield citing a non-existent rule about excessive recreational vehicles. I crumpled it up, checked the actual HOA guidelines, confirmed there was no such rule, and went about my day. The passive-aggressive campaign continued for weeks. Notes about my Jeep being an eyesore, texts about community standards, and even a formal letter expressing concerns about my commitment to neighborhood values. I documented everything but chose not to engage directly. Meanwhile at school, Linda made sure I was assigned to the least desirable committees and routinely questioned my teaching methods during board discussions. The situation escalated when I was selected to lead the spring fundraiser despite Linda's objections. The principal had been impressed with my detailed proposal and previous experience. Linda cornered me in the parking lot after the meeting. You may have charmed Principal Barnes, but this community has standards and traditions. You're not changing things that have worked perfectly fine for years," she said through gritted teeth. I maintained my professional tone. "The goal is to raise money for the school, Linda. If we can do that more effectively with new ideas, isn't that what matters?" She stepped closer, her designer perfume overwhelming. "You don't understand how things work here. People who don't fit in don't last long." The veiled threat hung in the air between us. I simply smiled and got into my car. That weekend I received 3 separate HOA violation notices, all for increasingly absurd infractions. Improper mailbox height, it was standard USPS height, unapproved front door color, it was the same color as when I bought the house, and my personal favorite, aggressive vehicle presence regarding my Jeep. I decided to address the situation directly at the next HOA meeting. I presented photographic evidence that my property was in compliance with actual written guidelines and requested that the harassment stop. Linda, presiding over the meeting, dismissed my concerns as the overreactions of someone unfamiliar with community standards. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one spoke up. Things reached a breaking point the weekend of the spring fundraiser. My carnival-themed event had been wildly successful, raising nearly 3 times the funds of previous years. Students, parents, and faculty were thrilled. Everyone except Linda, who had spent the entire event documenting safety violations that didn't exist. I returned home exhausted but satisfied, looking forward to a quiet Sunday to recover. At 2 a.m. my doorbell rang incessantly. Groggy and confused, I made my way downstairs to find Linda standing on my porch, arms crossed, flanked by 2 embarrassed-looking women I recognized from her book club. "You need to move your Jeep immediately," she demanded without preamble. "My sister and her family just arrived from Chicago and they need to park in your driveway." I stared at her, certain I was still dreaming. "What? No, it's 2 in the morning and that's my driveway. We're having a family reunion tomorrow. The street will be full and your driveway is closest to my house. It's the neighborly thing to do," she insisted, as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. "Linda, I'm not moving my Jeep out of my own driveway so your family can park there. That's absurd. Please leave so I can go back to sleep." Her face contorted with indignation. "This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that doesn't belong in Pine Ridge. The HOA has community easement rights." "That's not what an easement is," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Good night, Linda." I closed the door and went back to bed, ignoring the continued ringing of my doorbell for the next 5 minutes. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. At exactly 4:03 a.m., I was jolted awake by pounding on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers standing on my porch. I opened the door, confused and concerned. "Ma'am, we received a 911 call about a trespassing situation and possible threat," one officer explained. "Trespassing? I've been asleep," I said, thoroughly confused. The second officer looked uncomfortable. "The caller stated that you're illegally preventing her from accessing a community easement and made threatening statements." As they spoke, Linda emerged from the shadows of her front porch across the street, arms crossed triumphantly. The pieces clicked into place. "Officers, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. My neighbor wants to use my private driveway for her family's parking and called 911 when I refused. There's no easement on my property. I have the deed and property survey if you need to see them." The officers exchanged glances. One sighed heavily, suggesting this wasn't their first encounter with a situation like this. They took my statement, and I provided copies of the harassment documentation I'd been keeping. As we talked, Linda marched across the street, dragging a half-asleep man I assumed was her husband. "Officers, I want that vehicle towed. It's in direct violation of—" "Ma'am," the older officer interrupted firmly, "we've established that the driveway is private property, and your neighbor is under no obligation to let you use it. Furthermore, making a false 911 call is a serious offense." Linda's face went through a fascinating transformation. Shock, outrage, and then a calculating smile. "There must be some confusion. I never called 911. I was merely concerned when I saw suspicious activity at my neighbor's house." The officer's expression remained impassive. "We have the recorded call, ma'am. Now I strongly suggest you return home and cease contact with your neighbor. If there are legitimate HOA concerns, they can be addressed through proper channels during reasonable hours." Linda's husband gently led her away as she sputtered about community standards and proper procedures. I thanked the officers for their time and managed to get a few more hours of sleep before my alarm went off. The next day I submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board about Linda's harassment, including the police report number from the 911 incident. I also sent copies to the school board, where Linda's position as treasurer gave her significant influence. I wasn't trying to cause trouble, but I needed the harassment to stop. 3 days later, I received an email from the school board president requesting a meeting. When I arrived, I was surprised to find not only the president but the entire board and the district superintendent. They had launched an investigation following my complaint and discovered some irregularities in the fundraiser accounts Linda had been managing. It seemed she had been remilitating funds for years, using school donations to pay for HOA legal consultations and community events that doubled as campaign activities for her husband's city council aspirations. The following week, a certified letter arrived from the HOA board. They had called an emergency session and voted to remove Linda as president, citing abuse of position and actions bringing negative attention to the community. The letter included a formal apology for the harassment I had experienced and an assurance that my property, including my Jeep, was in full compliance with community guidelines. The final blow came during a special school board meeting where Linda was publicly asked to resign from her treasurer position. As the superintendent detailed the financial discrepancies, Linda's face reddened with each word. When he mentioned the potential for criminal charges if full restitution wasn't made, she let out an audible gasp. The room watched in stunned silence as Linda Harrington, Queen of Pine Ridge Estates, was handed a document outlining the $23,467 she would need to repay to avoid prosecution. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she took the paper, her carefully constructed world of control crumbling around her. "This is absurd! I've given everything to this community," she exclaimed, her voice cracking with indignation. But looking around the room at the faces of neighbors and colleagues who had finally seen behind her facade, she seemed to realize that her reign was truly over. Without another word, she gathered her designer handbag and left the room, the sharp click of her heels echoing her departure from power.